Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, this is Andy Strickler. I am currently the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Connecticut College, located in New London, Connecticut. I've also worked in athletics and admissions at Kalamazoo College, Beloit College, Sinus College, and Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010.
Good afternoon, friends. After 9 sensational days in the Outer Banks and 2 great days in Wilmington, I am on day 12 of a 23-day trip. Currently in Virginia Beach. Tomorrow is the only day I visit 2 colleges. I'll visit Christopher Newport and Hampton University before heading to Williamsburg, where I will tour William and Mary on Tuesday. Now, I have to give you a great food tip. If you are ever in Virginia Beach, you got to check out Big Sam's Inlet Cafe. I can walk to it from my hotel. Now, you get a great ocean view there, but this is not a 5-star ambiance. But I just had the best crab cake sandwich I have had in my life, so I'm in a very good mood. Crab cakes are my favorite food. Sorry, Maryland, but I've never had a crab cake taste quite that good when I was in Maryland. Of course, I haven't tried every place. And I'm going on the crab crawl tour of Maryland colleges in 2026, so I'll see if Maryland can match Big Sam's Inlet Cafe in Virginia Beach, but had to shout them out. And I actually, the more I talk about it, the hungrier I'm getting, so I might have to walk over there again tonight for dinner. Now, originally in today's episode, I was going to have more to say about colleges offering free tuition and removing home equity at colleges from their financial calculations. And I was going to go more in depth on 30 factors to consider when building a college list. But I'm pushing that back to next week because I decided to not work the last few days and enjoy Thanksgiving and enjoy my family. It's taken me a while, but I'm slowly learning to relax and not work all the time. But I'm excited about today. You're going to get part 3 of 4 of Andy Strickler's Deep Dive, where he answers 20 frequently asked questions about early decisions. And then you get a brand new second interview. It's one I'm very excited about. It's a very impressive young educational entrepreneur named Jin Chow, who's the founder of Polygence. And she's also a recipient of Forbes 30 Under 30 Award for educators who are shaping our world. And over the next 3 weeks, she's going to answer all the questions I could think of to ask her about what is Polygence. And I asked her some tough questions and she was ready for them. And she talks about how Polygence can help students by matching them with research projects in line with their passions and pairing them up with scholars and academics as mentors. Friends, a couple quick announcements today. We have 70 college counselors who have submitted an application to join Counselors Connect, our monthly Zoom meeting for support and professional development for all types of college counselor. And I just want to remind you that we're approaching our priority application deadline, which is the 12th of December. So we're 8 days away, and we will be prioritizing people who meet that December 10th deadline. The nice thing is all of our applications came in this week from places we were a little soft in our applicant pool. More public school counselors, more CBO counselors, more independent school counselors, international counselors, and counselors from the Midwest. So thank you for every one of you who told your high school counselor or CBO counselor to complete the application. It only takes 60 seconds. It's a very short app. Just go to yourcollegebounkid.com, click the resources tab, and you will see Counselors Connect application. Friends, as we get closer to episode 500, I've been thinking a lot about what we can do to improve for the next 500 episodes. And over these next 500, I'm going to be a lot more transparent with you just about our numbers and our goals for the podcast. As you know, we have a mission. and that's to make college knowledge available to all. And so all means we need to be expanding our reach. And one thing that I found alarming was I checked the stats the other day. And you first start a podcast, literally, I know this was a little OCD, but I remember checking 8-10 times a day. I'm not kidding you, to see what our numbers were like the first probably 2-3 months, 4 months. Now, like, I might check it every 8 months. I kind of forget about it. But I went over and I checked our stats, and I saw that we're getting like 35,000 downloads a month. Now, that's great compared to month one where we had 239. But we were consistently at the 50,000 download mark for a while. So that means we've dropped off. And some of it's understandable. If you know there's 2 pizzerias in town, you're going to sell more pizzas than 30 pizzerias move in. And now everybody's getting a little slice of that market share. And that's basically what's happened. I mean, you could count the number of college admissions podcasts on a couple fingers when we started ours. Now there's literally just, like dozens and dozens of them. So I do understand that. But I also have to admit, I've become sloppy in podcast marketing for really a couple of years now. So I reached out to Libsyn, and they're the company that generates our RSS feed that goes to Apple, Spotify, and a bunch of places. I wanted to find out what can we do to get our numbers up? Like, we've always gone up. Every year we've gone up, 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 up. It's the first time I've ever seen us drop off. And I don't think it's because our quality has decreased. So I need to find out, like, okay, what can we do? So they got back to me and they said that, well, do you know there's 7 major distribution channels that your podcast is not being streamed out to? So I fixed that immediately. And one of them is Audible. So if you're an Audible subscriber, you can listen to your College-Bound Kid for free when you log into the Audible app. So that's one. And we really could use some 5-star reviews on Audible. We literally just went up and we do not have a single review as of, I'm recording late this time, Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I know you guys are comfortable reviewing because we actually have the most reviews of any college admissions podcast. And we hit 300 reviews this week. So that's all because of you. Like, we don't really ask for them. Maybe once or twice a year we would ask for them, but really don't ask for them. How do I know that we have the most? Because I'm competitive. Sort of, I am. I check these things. Actually, the number of reviews for any podcast is a reflection of the size of the audience. Size of the audience and the longevity of the podcast. So we also are now being recommended on the NACAC website. You go to NACAC, they have their podcast that they recommend. We're up there as well. But there's a lot more that we're going to do. I'll be letting you know a lot more about that to fulfill our mission of making college knowledge available to all. We have to get the word out. There's hundreds of thousands of people out there who are looking for knowledge that we share on here twice a week, but they don't know we exist. So we can't help them until we can come up with a more effective way of letting them know that we exist. So I'll be sharing some ideas of what we all can do to help with this in the next few months. But I am grateful because to go from 239 downloads in month one to where we are now, we are in the top 3% of all podcasts for downloads. But, I'm not looking in the rear view mirror. I'm looking forward, and I want to know how we can reach more people. Well, I love the 2 interviews I did that you're going to hear today, and I hope you'll enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoyed participating in them. So let's dive right in with part 3 of 4 with Andy Strickler.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 3 of 4, Andy responds to a few reasons I have heard that the ED2 admit rate is lower than the ED1 admit rate. Andy answers the question, why do some colleges choose to have 1 round of early decision instead of 2? Do they see having a second round of ED2 as something that's beneath them? Andy shares his thoughts on the practice of taking a student who applied early action and trying to flip them into early decision 2. What does he think about that? This is something that's happening at some places. Andy talks about what he feels about a student who applies early decision 2 right out of the chute before they've even heard from the early decision 1 school. And he shares what a student should do if this happens. Listen and enjoy.
An ultra selective,
Yep.
Whether it's Ivy, upper level NESGAC, MIT, all those super duper selectives, you can get a lot of work done in ED1. and therefore you are niche micro targeting in ED2.
Yeah.
If an institution so chose, you could get most of your work done on institutional priorities in ED1, and then, throw some icing on the cake in ED2, without a doubt. I could totally see that as a possibility.
Another reason, I've heard, and once again, you've got me thinking about looking at this through the selectivity prism of the school and how much of a difference that makes. That and I see this, there's a kid who applies ED1 and doesn't get in, and may not be reading the tea leaves that maybe I overshot, and maybe I need to look at a school that's not quite as selective. Instead, they just say, you know what, that school wasn't for me. And then they kind of overshoot again in ED2. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's another reason I've heard people explain that we just get some applicants that are just not appropriate for our school. Maybe people think ED does more wonders than it does, and it's not going to make a C student appealing to us.
Yeah. I was having lunch years ago. This is probably fall 2020. And I'm having lunch with another chief enrollment officer of a institution on the East Coast. And we got talking about a particular Ivy League institution. And, the spring of 2020, 5% of the most selective institutions in the country were test optional. In the fall of 2020, basically everyone is test optional.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there at lunch, and this person goes, these kids don't realize that, yeah, they may be test optional, but it doesn't mean they're grade optional.
Yes.
Because this particular Ivy saw their ED pool go up like 95 to 120% or something like that. Because everyone's like, oh, now that I don't have to submit test scores, I should roll the dice. And we're like, hey, just because you don't have to submit test scores, you still have to submit the transcript. And, your 3.2 GPA at a, nice, solid independent school is not really going to impress somebody in an Ivy League, admission office. But they don't realize that.
Yale's been pretty transparent about what you're talking about. They've explained it in a couple ways. For one, they literally changed their whole reading system to allow a non-competitive applicant to get denied with much less time intensity on their reading process.
Totally. But that's not going to stop the student from rolling the dice and saying, listen, I'm going to take a crack at it. Here it comes.
Correct. And the other thing they've done is that's part of how they've actually articulated their go back to standardized testing. That's controversial. Not everybody wants to necessarily agree with that, but they've partly said that they felt they were almost misleading some people to think they had a shot when they really didn't.
Right.
And I don't want to get into all of that because, we get into that. We'll go off on a rabbit trail.
Seriously,
I know the arguments against that, which are strong as well. But I also know what they're talking about because, I'm a huge fan. I love what you guys and Colorado College are other, you're the two that are our co-hosts on the podcast. I love what you guys are doing with no harm testing.
Right.
I love it. But the one thing that I will say I do like about standardized testing as a counselor is it can help me convince a non-competitive kid that I know you like computer science. I know it's been your dream to go to MIT. Your 580 math's not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Look at common data set. Go listen to my interview I did with Petey at MIT when he said our research shows high 700s math correlates to success in our program.
Yeah. I totally get it. Totally get that.
Yeah. I had a question for you. I took a look at who has ED1 and not ED2.
Okay.
Kind of breaks down into two groups, right? You have probably schools like some of the ones you were at before that probably, in all honesty, if you had an ED2, you probably wouldn't get enough applicants to make it worth it. I'm sure that's probably was the rationale, right, for not doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have schools like that. But then you also have the 8 Ivies, Northwestern, Duke, Williams, and Amherst. And as far as I can see, that's it, other than some of the really, really selectives that just do the restrictive early actions, the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Caltechs, or the restrictive like Georgetown and Notre Dame. So do you think some of those schools would almost see it as I don't know, stigma to add an ED2 round?
I don't think they're going to see it as a stigma. I think they're approaching that strategically.
Elaborate
For
on that.
instance, we're talking about Amherst and Williams, right?
Yeah, it's only 12 schools. It's Amherst, Williams, the 8 Ivies, Northwestern, and Duke. Like in
Okay.
recent years, Rice, Carnegie Mellon, and who's the other one that just added ED2? Boston College. They all,
Yeah.
So, but it's a very short list of highly, highly selectives that have ED, but they only have one round.
Right. So I'm thinking about it this way. Okay. And I know nothing about Amherst except for the fact that I was there 2 weekends ago to watch our men's soccer team in the NESCAC quarters.
Right.
I know nothing about, because I've never worked in their admissions office. I sit in NESCAC dean's meetings with Matt McGann, who's a wonderful human being, and
He's been
is
on
the
our
one guy.
podcast. I think he's one of the
Yeah,
great guys in
he's
this
the
world,
one guy who's more of a Supreme Court nerd than I am.
isn't
But
he? He's great.
I suspect when they start the year, they're laying out like, this is what we are trying to do in ED1, but they're laying out goals and aspirations. But I also think that they feel the need to lay out some kind of limits. We only want to admit X number of students, regardless of what the pool looks like. Adding ED2 only serves to make those conversations in ED1 harder. And therefore, you're squeezing, instead of squeezing 2 applicant pools, which would be ED1 and RD, you're squeezing 3 applicant pools, ED1, ED2, and RD. Because I think that the depth of their ED pool is probably, in terms of quantity and quality, so strong that they could fill their entire class if they wanted to, and they could check off every institutional objective in ED1. And therefore,
They don't need it.
do we need it? But also, do we want to make that conversation in ED1 that much harder by taking our limitations and cutting it back by an additional 30%? What's the purpose? We're only going to make that committee conversation and shaping / crafting the class in ED1, we're only going to make it more difficult.
Andy, let's get back to ED1 versus ED2 numbers.
Sure.
One question I'm asked a lot, it came in from listeners on our podcast, is why won't schools list their ED2 admit rate? It's really, you don't really see it out there. It's not really published.
Right.
It's very, very, very rare. Occasionally,
Yes.
I'll hear a school say it. A couple of years ago, Emory said we had a 38% ED1 and a 9% ED2. But
Right.
that wasn't, that was more in a presentation to counselors, that kind of thing.
Right.
What is your theory on why a lot of schools keep that close to the vest?
That's a really good question. Most schools are going to combine their data for ED1 and ED2 and give you a comprehensive ED1, ED2 admit rate. So they're going to say, here's our ED admit rate, here's our regular admit rate. Because in terms of practice, the program ED1 and ED2 are exactly alike.
Mm-hmm.
So why differentiate? And then, it also could serve to really turn off some students from going ED2 if you find out that, the admit rate in ED1 is 38 and the admit rate in ED2 is 9.
Yeah.
Why apply ED2 if the admit rate is pretty darn close to the RD admit rate? What's the upside?
So that one reason is it's a deterrent. Another reason that I've had explained to me, and it makes some sense to me.
Sure.
Which
What do you got?
is, particularly if you're asking me to share that in an information session, I don't want to linger on that. And it would take time for me to unpack it, to explain it,
Yeah.
for people to properly understand it in a way that it's just not worth that much of my time with all the stuff I need to cover in an information session. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's focusing on the sizzle instead of the steak.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think that families get a little too wrapped up in extraneous, non-important details of the process, and they're trying to micromanage it. Like, what extracurricular activity looks best, or what summer activity is going to look best,
Trust me,
and
we get that
we
all the
all
time.
come back with the same answer, which is like, just be authentic.
I know.
Well, what authentic works best? It's like, come on, relax. And as a result, if we start parsing out admit rate differences between ED1 and ED2, and if there's a statistically significant difference, we're going to spend so much time with families asking the question, but why the difference between ED1 and ED2? That we're going to lose the forest because we're standing there talking about the first tree right in front of us. It makes total sense to me that it's a rabbit hole that we can get down with a particular student or family that doesn't serve us, but more importantly, doesn't serve the student well.
I'm sure you're aware there's schools that have early action and early decision.
Yes.
And
Colorado College being one, I believe.
yes, Colorado College, Richmond, Miami, Case Western Reserve, Northeastern,
Yep.
Chicago. There's quite a few.
Yep.
Tulane. Friends, after I got out of this interview, I started thinking of a whole bunch of schools that I could have also mentioned that have EA and ED. And there's a bunch of them. But here's just about a dozen or so. Santa Clara, Loyola Marymount, University of Denver, Howard, Spelman, Fordham, Elon, William & Mary, UVA, Villanova, SMU, TCU, Vermont. That's just a few of many that have ED and EA. Now, what some of those schools have done is they have used EA almost as a pipeline to steer people to ED2.
Oh, yes.
I mean, Tulane was very public about it. I remember one year they said we flipped 95 people
Yes.
to ED2 by sending them that sort of letter of,
Yep.
we could have a spot for you if you'll flip to ED2.
Yep.
What are your
Chicago's been doing that too.
Yep, Chicago's doing that too. What are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I'm not a huge fan.
Mm-hmm. What do you not like about it?
Well, I worry about a generation of students that is racked with anxiety and stress to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and leveraging that or preying upon it, depending on how you want to word it,
Mm-hmm.
for the benefit of an institution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if a student is dying to go to Tulane or dying to go to Chicago or dying to go to a particular place that's going to have that dialogue and conversation, it can serve in their best interest. But I tend to think that we as adults need to try to work to de-stress this process and demystify it as much as we can. I mean, this is a generation of students who have greater levels of mental health challenges than any generation we've navigated. And, I go into high schools and I tell adults, I'll tell all the parents in the room, like, listen, our kids need to hear from us over and over and over again that they're okay and it's going to work out and be okay. And I worry about times where we push the button on the anxiety side to push a student in a direction that, maybe they didn't intend to go on the first pass. If someone wanted to apply ED2, it's right there. They could have done it.
Yeah.
But they intentionally, they decided on a particular admission program because that was what they felt was best for them at that moment. And if they come to a change in that on their own, that's one thing. But to invite or to leverage anxiety to get there, I think steps into a gray area that makes me feel a little uncomfortable.
It's nice to hear you say that, because I mean, from a student standpoint, they hate it, right?
Yeah.
But of course, students understand the student side of things. You're sitting right at that intersection where you're student centric, but you also have institutional needs. And others in your seat say, hey, I'm locking people in, and I'm serving the needs of my institution by locking people in. That's why I thought you'd be a good person to ask that question to, and it's kind of nice for your student-centric side to come out.
Yeah, and I sit in the chief enrollment officer seat, so I get it. I
Yeah.
understand institutional pressures. I feel them all the time. We had our budget committee meeting from 12 to 1, and I spent a couple minutes talking to my president afterwards. I know the pressures she's facing about enrollment. I know the pressures that I'm facing about enrollment, and trying to balance that with what's best for kids is that's what causes our hair to go gray in this business. At least it makes my hair go gray.
Let's talk about another thing that I see out there, which is a student applies ED2. I can tell you the last 2 years, this has happened to me with Wash U in Michigan.
Okay.
So they apply ED2 to Wash U. Then they get in Michigan early action before Wash U's ED2 decisions are released. And then they reach out to Wash U and say, I cancel my ED2. What are your thoughts on that?
All right. So I'm going to split hairs here because I
Okay.
think we're talking about the same thing, but I'm actually going to add another fork to the road.
Okay.
Okay. I'm okay with someone going EA at a particular place and then ED2 at a different place and doing that all at once in September or October, right? October 1st, I'm going to apply EA to Michigan and I'm going to apply ED2 to Wash U, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that because, the student wants to get all their submissions in and just have it out of their hands. That's okay. Okay. I'm okay with that because EA is non-binding. It's a non-restrictive program, and it's, Wash U as an ED2. That's their choice to have an admission program that operates along that timeline. The other fork that I have a greater challenge with is someone who on October 1st applies ED1 at Wash U and at the same time submits an ED2 app to Connecticut College. I don't want an ED2 app in my funnel if you have an unresolved ED1 app somewhere.
That was my next question for you.
I know.
You got to it before I got to it.
I don't like that at all.
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
And I have conversations with high school counselors where I tell them, like, please don't sign that ED agreement and don't send us the supporting materials if they have an active ED1 app somewhere else.
I had this happen to me this year for the first time to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody just went ahead and did all this. And then they reached out to me and they're like, what should I do? I should have never done that. But what would you recommend a student do if they did that and didn't realize how inappropriate it was?
I think you write the ED2 school and say, hey, listen, I applied ED2. It should be regular. It should be RD. And then if you get dinged at the ED1 school and you want to convert from RD to ED2, that's absolutely acceptable. And kids do that all the time. But to basically lay out, I have an ED1 here, I have an ED2 here, and those are my 12 RD schools and have them all sent out on September 15th, I don't like that. It annoys me.
Yeah, I understand why. Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Andy Strickler, where he answers 20 frequently asked questions about early decision. Hope you'll join us next week for the next segment.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I'm very excited about this 3-part interview you're going to hear with Jin Chow, the founder of Polygence. And Jin is a recipient of the Forbes Award for 30 Under 30 Movers and Shakers in Education. And I explain in part 3 of this interview how I was once a real skeptic of Polygence, but how their company in particular and Jin's values, her core beliefs, and others like Maureen, who I've met from the company, how they won me over. But I ask us some really tough questions in this interview, especially in part 2 and a little bit in part 3. And Jin answers those tough questions exceptionally well. In part one, Jin gives her backstory. She shares why she started Polygence. Jin explains what Polygence does. Jin explains the growth of Polygence. Jin explains what Launchpad is. Jin shares where most of their students come from. Jin explains to us what Pods is. Jin explains what their cost structure is and the 3 tiers that they offer. Jin talks about the industry experts and academics that work with students. And Jin walks us through what happens in a session with a mentee and a mentor. Jin shares the range of areas where they have academics and industry experts to work with students. And finally, Jin tells us how long are the research papers the students write. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Jin Chow, the co-founder of Polygence. Jin, we're excited to have you to the Your College Bound Kid podcast.
Thank
Welcome.
you so much for having me. Super excited to be here with you all.
Yeah, great. Well, I've had some great conversations with several members of your team at SACAC, at NACAC, and I started noticing some of the families, that I work with in counseling have been using your services. So we were thrilled to have you come on here. And before we dive in, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your backstory so we'll understand the context in which you'll speak today.
Of course. So again, thank you so much for having me. Super honored to be here. So a little bit about me. My name is Jin. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, actually. I came to the US when I was 18 for college. I studied comparative literature, of all things, at Princeton. And then after undergrad, I wanted to continue doing research in the humanities because I loved it so much and I loved learning different languages. And so I went to Stanford to pursue a PhD in North African literature, also in Comp Lit. I was working on French literature. I picked up Arabic. And then in the middle of my PhD, I decided I wanted to do something that's higher impact within education that worked with younger students. And I wanted to do more than just write papers that maybe 5 people will read over the course of my life. And so I decided to sort of put the PhD on hold, which currently it's still on hold, to start Polygence, I can just say a few words, which pairs high schoolers and middle schoolers with PhD level researchers, near peer mentors to do research projects and passion projects. And I've been doing it for 5 years now, since 2019. I miss research a lot, but I sort of do a lot of it in my free time. I still do a lot of reading. I keep up with my languages. And so, yeah, excited to share my story with you all.
Yeah, you have to love literature just looking at what you've studied. I admire your intellectual curiosity there. That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, Polygence has really kind of taken the country by storm. I mean, talk about your explosive growth.
Yeah, so we started actually right before COVID hit. So we started in mid 2019. And unbeknownst to us, like the biggest online education boom was about to happen because of the unfortunate pandemic. And so we actually started adopting Zoom before Zoom was even really a thing. And then when the pandemic hit, we just saw tons of students signing up because the first summer, so the 2019 and 2020, the first 2 summers of COVID, students lost their opportunities to go to in-person programs. They couldn't go to, the Brown summer, residential program anymore. And so that's when we started getting a lot of students wanting to do meaningful research experiences that were virtual over the summer. And then even now, after the pandemic has thankfully subsided a bit, online education has really become something that's here to stay. And so we've been able to just continue to ride that wave. And a lot of students and families want to have these kinds of virtual research experiences to supplement whatever, summer programs that they're doing or in-person sports camps that they're doing. And so it's been a really interesting journey to see that transformation of digitization of education.
Now, I was talking with Maureen, who's been really helpful, and I said to her, don't you guys have like 2,000 students that have gone through your program? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she said not 2,000, 6,000. Is that true that you're from 2019
to 2024, you've had like 6,000 students.
So we've graduated 4,000 and we have a couple thousand that's, currently active. So yeah, we've had 4,000 completed project, and right now we have, a couple thousand active students. So it's been pretty crazy, and we have over 3,000 mentors who are on our platform. Not all of them are actively currently mentoring, but we have a pretty big base of mentors, educators that we vetted and amassed that we could call upon to, mentor students in whatever subject areas. And so it's a pretty exciting thing to be able to to give access to to students, to these experts.
I can certainly understand why you haven't been able to finish your PhD, because it's a pretty big organization you've got going over there.
I also had a kid.
Oh, wow. Something small like that.
So PhD is not getting finished anytime soon.
So why don't you walk us through your Pathfinders program? Why don't you explain the process from the time someone signs up to the time a student gets assigned a specific project and a mentor? Like, just walk us through all that. How does that work?
Yeah, so we've actually recently renamed it to Launchpad,
Okay.
because we wanted it to be a launching pad for the core program. So Pathfinders or Launchpad, what that program does is essentially helping students who don't really have a good sense of what they are interested in get exposed to 3 different subject areas before deciding which topic to choose to dive into their core research program in. So let me give you an example. We have tons of students come in saying, I'm broadly interested in biology and life sciences. I kind of have an interest in cancer biology because I love that unit in high school, but I also am really fascinated by plants, let's say. And at the same time, I think neuroscience is just really cool. And so for a kid like this, we would pair them with a cancer biologist, we would pair them with a plant biologist, and we would pair them with a neuroscientist. And they would get 1 hour with each of these mentors to learn a little bit about what is it like to be an oncologist, what kind of research topics would be available for a high schooler like myself who has done, let's say, AP biology. They can do a little bit of brainstorming for potential topic ideas, talk through, the subject, what it means to major in it. And then after that, they do a mini reflection with us to figure out, okay, now that you've met these 3 people, you've learned a little bit more about these 3 areas, what would you like to do your main project in? And so that's kind of the on-ramp that we've designed for students who maybe have a bit more time, maybe who are in late middle school or very early high school, who want to get that exposure before deciding what to pursue.
What's the breakdown between people that come in sort of knowing what they want to do and people that come in sort of looking for some guidance from you to help them to suss out something that might be a good fit for their interests? And how does all that work?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And there's no straight answer because it really depends on the season. Like people who are coming now, who are trying to get a project in before college admissions, mostly would just dive straight into the core program and do the full thing. But students who are coming in a little bit earlier in the school year and who, let's say, want to do have a little bit more time would typically opt for the Launchpad version. And so it hovers between I would say 20-25% of students opt for something like Launchpad. It also adds time, right? The core program is 3 to 5 months. Adding on Launchpad would add probably another month to it, depending on how quickly you do those sessions in succession. And so it also depends on the student's timeline.
Now, what's your breakdown between U.S. versus international students amongst all the students in your
majority
cohort?
U.S. for now. We have, as I mentioned to you earlier before we started the recording, we have an increasing number of international students, but the majority of our student base, learner base, is still based in the U.S.
And don't you just kind of attribute California to your roots? Is it sort of Silicon Valley with a strong? Because I definitely notice when I work with students in Silicon Valley, I see Polygence, feels like I see it more there than other places in the country.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think partly it's just because we're based here. It's interesting because we don't do that many in-person, events because we started during COVID and everything was
Sure.
virtual. Our team is mostly remote. But I think because, of my relationship with Stanford, we started off recruiting a lot of Stanford mentors because I was literally I'm still based in Menlo Park, like right
Sure.
next to Stanford. So I think that has something to do with it. And yeah, so it started off that way. But by now, I mean, we have a pretty wide sort of spread across the US, but California still accounts for a big chunk of our students.
And talk about both the costs involved as well as the different levels, because I know
Yeah.
there's different levels. If you could sort of explain how that works.
Totally. So we wanted to design the system so that students of all kinds of financial backgrounds could join us. And so we have a program called Pods, which is on the most affordable end, which is actually not one-on-one, but a small group sort of baby project kind of experience, which is 6 sessions, 3 to 6 kids, set topic for mostly for middle schoolers and young high schoolers who maybe don't have the time or the ability to come up with their own project idea. So that's at $495 for our 6 week experience. And then we have our core program, which is the 10 session, 3 to 5 months, one-on-one, full blown research project. That is priced at $27.95. And then we have, like we just mentioned, the Launchpad plus core program. And then we also have a premium showcasing support plus core program, which then would inch into the $3,500 range. And so we have a full sort of suite depending on the student's timeline, depending on the student's outcomes. And so, for example, if a student who comes in really wants to compete at a science fair and wants more support with that, they would probably go for the core program plus a showcasing specialist track for competing, where we would pair them with a mentor who has experience mentoring science fair projects or has experience with science fairs themselves to help them bring that project across the science fair finish line. Same with publications, same with conference presentations. And so there's that sort of $500 all the way to $4,000 range.
And how many academics and industry experts are you working with, and how do you recruit them?
Yeah, so I would say the industry experts would be a minority of our mentor base. The majority are still very much academics. Although I will say, for example, we will have let's say aerospace engineers who maybe recently graduated from their program and are currently working, I don't know, at NASA, or we have, you know, fashion MFA holders who are recent grads but now working in Broadway costume design. And so those are kind of like hybrid academic slash industry experts, and we would pair them with students who obviously are interested in those areas but maybe are less interested in the research component, but maybe more in the creation or in something more creative. And but that being said, the majority of our mentors are involved in academic research right now, and they are PhD researchers. Some of them are young assistant professors. And the reason we pick, we started off with sort of the PhD researcher, PhD student sort of group is for 2 reasons. One is we wanted it to be a near peer mentorship experience. We didn't want it. We saw and we've heard feedback that students don't connect as well with 50, 60-year-old professors. And also those professors are typically, I guess, less attuned to working with high schoolers. They've been out of college or out of high school for a while. And so with these PhD level mentors, they're, late 20s, maybe early 30s. They can relate to students a lot better. And we've also seen just a better outcome and relationship building when it comes to those kinds of mentorship relationships, which is why we err towards that level of
And
mentorship.
how do you recruit them?
Yeah. So we have relationships with a lot of universities and their departments. And at the beginning, that's how we recruited a lot of mentors. Hey, send us your best, teaching graduate teachers. But by now, we've really stopped doing any kind of active recruitment. It's purely by word of mouth. Polygence mentors have such a great experience working with Polygence students that they just tell all their friends. Like we've had mentors just post in their lab groups like, hey, I started working with this mentorship program. It gives you a great teaching experience. We also give a lot of professional development to mentors to help them become better teachers. So they just tell their friends.
Walk us through sort of what happens with like a mentee and a mentor in a session. Like what actually happens? Because your core program has what, like 10 sessions?
10 sessions, exactly.
So what actually happens in those 10 sessions?
Yeah, so sessions one to three-ish is really important in setting the stage. So mentors will probably assign the most amount of reading during that time, helping the student refine the question, getting to know the student, talking through, getting a good sense of the baseline knowledge level of the student. Let's say, to make it more concrete, let's say it's a cancer biology project. It will probably be a lot of reading around the topic that the student has chosen, narrowing down, figuring out what data set to use if they want to do a data analysis project. And then by session 3 is when we ask the mentor and student to have a defined research question or hypothesis that they're looking at if they're doing a paper, which is the majority of our students. And then sessions, let's say 4 to 6, would be starting the writing process, starting the data analysis, starting the coding, whatever, whatever outcome the student has chosen. And the sessions itself is sort of a hybrid of learning and a lot of sort of guided discussion. So it's almost like a graduate seminar rather than a lecture. And we designed it that way because we want this to be a student-driven experience and not another experience where students are being talked at, right? Because that's essentially what they experience in school, and for the most part in college as well. And we want it to be sort of almost like a mini PhD experience where you get to be your own, decider of what research project to do, what direction to take it. And the mentor is really there to course correct and to guide you and to point you to the right resources. And so a lot of the discussions that happen in the session are discussions. It's not PowerPoint lectures. It's not, the mentor talking at you. And then towards the end of the program, it's a lot of writing review. It's a lot of picking the journals to submit. It's a lot of sort of putting finishing touches to the paper. A lot of times, this is the student's first experience writing a long form research paper. And so they need to learn how to do citations. They need to learn what a bibliography is. And so a lot of mentors use the final bits of the sessions to walk the student through that and teach them how to do that.
And talk about sort of the range of different areas where you have mentees and mentors. As you mentioned, this is not like a STEM only thing, right? You've already given allusion to some of the other fields, but why don't you just walk us through the breadth of the different areas where people could find someone of interest for a potential field of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I myself am from the humanities and the arts.
Sure.
And it matters a lot to me that we are not just, a STEM focused program. And my co-founder has his PhD in physics. And so we kind of represent the whole spectrum from literature to physics. And so we have students doing projects in fine arts, in music, in literature, history, all the way to the social sciences, econ, finance, business, entrepreneurship, and then all the way to the hard sciences, biology, AI, ML, app development, um, physics, chemistry, like you name it. And we support also not just academic projects, like I mentioned, so like students who want to write a paper or who want to submit to a conference and come to us, but we also have students coming to us for creative writing, wanting to submit to, creative writing competitions, or we recently had a student write his own song and learn how to produce it, and it's now on Spotify. Like that's a Polygence project. So it's sort of a mixture of passion projects and research projects as well, even though, as you can imagine, most students are coming to us for sort of the more traditional research. But we really want to make sure students and families know that there's much more to projects than just research, and that you can do an incredibly meaningful and impressive project that is creative and not academic in nature.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So for the more traditional research paper, how long are these papers typically? What are they looking at lengthwise?
Anywhere between 10 and 25 pages, I would say. Usually this is the longest thing students have ever written. I've worked with many students who tell me the longest thing I've ever written is 3 pages or 5 pages. And it also depends on the journal that they're submitting to. Most journals have a minimum page limit or a maximum page limit. So I would say anywhere between 10 and 25 I've seen.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Jin Chow, founder of Polygence. We hope you'll join us next week for the next session. On Thursday's episode, June and I will be discussing an article entitled Letter to the Admission Profession. It is by Eric Hoover. It appeared in the Chronicle in early November of this year. Susan and I will answer a question from a mom who has several questions actually about dual enrollment. You'll get part 4 or 5 of my interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford. They're the founders of Initial View, which is the company that launched Glimpse Video. And they're explaining to us what Glimpse Video is and how Glimpse Video helps students in the college application process. And then we'll also have part 4 or 5 of my interview with Fabrizio Delosio. He's the Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment Management and the Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And Fabrizio's helping us to understand the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And like I said, that's part 4 of 5. And friends, in closing, never forget that hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. See you on Thursday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.